When Karen and I moved to our home place 40 years ago, 7 acres were scarred by an active strip mine. The house suffered from years of neglect. The local economy, too, was in tatters. Jobs had been extracted to warmer climes, and the exodus of young people had already begun. My parents were beside themselves. Not only did we move into a ramshackle home on an abused piece of land, we moved into a depressed economy. I'm not blaming the former owner of our place for the strip mine. She and her husband had once run a small, diversified family farm, and judging by the prodigious amounts of home-canned fruits and vegetables we found in the basement, they had also managed to eat pretty darn well. Stories of people coming from far and wide to buy their eggs and their berries, the cow that was milked each morning and evening, and the abandoned hog barn reinforced that notion. But Dan was long gone, and Elsie was 92 and slowing down. And money was tight, I'm sure. Even in the best of times, farming is a precarious business. But even in the worst of times, someone who knows their land very well can usually subsist. Karen and I have spent the past 40 years rebuilding the richness that Dan and Elsie had built. The stripped and scarred pasture is starting to heal. Our garden soil is rich and deep. Once upon a time, Butler County and much of the rest of the United States could feed itself. Vegetables, pork, beef, poultry, and eggs were all produced on local farms and grown in sustainable fashion by local farmers. Those were the good old days, before industrialization, before globalization, and the ill-conceived farm policy, before forces that encouraged consolidation, before over-mechanization, conglomeration, and specialization. Those same forces spelled the end of the small, diversified family farm and the advent of the industrial farmer. When a county, let alone a country, can't feed itself, when it's dependent upon other nations and regions to supply its food or the petrochemicals needed to produce and transport the food, then that country has a homeland security problem. The food-producing infrastructure that once existed in Butler County and the United States is hopelessly broken. And many of us are totally at the mercy of a food supply system that is completely reliant on fossil fuels. If the horrors of climate chaos have taught us nothing else, we should have learned that we are one disaster away from famine. Our legislatures decided to favor big farms and to squeeze family farmers. Their choices led to today's farmers receiving just 15 cents of every dollar spent on food. Many farmers have to get off farm jobs just to survive, and many more have decided it's easier to get out of farming or just to sell the farm. Our current farm policy, which seems to be designed to prop up the industrial farmer and the profit-taking middleman and drive the little guy out of business, needs to be rethought. Until we can feed ourselves, we can have no homeland security. The same can be said for our local economies. Once upon a time, towns like mine had thriving local markets. Many people of my generation grew up in homes where a family could function on one paycheck. There were lots of good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. And when it was time, children would work in the same places their parents had worked. Or they would go to school and become teachers, business people, lawyers, doctors, or take up trades. Kids would take over the family farm. But the point is, many of these kids returned to the places where they grew up. The streets of our cities and towns were lined with local, prosperous businesses. Our neighbor Harold was also our mechanic. Gordon sold us our lawnmower and tires. Betty sold us our refrigerator. Mrs. Colquitt taught our kids, and Denny sold us hardware. And all of them could offer expert advice because they knew their product and their craft. There was never a shortage of folks willing to step up to staff the volunteer fire department or to man polling places. When I decided to go to college, my summer job was enough to pay for tuition and housing costs at Slippery Rock. Neither Karen nor I graduated with any student debt. In the 70s, the state picked up 70% of in-state tuition costs. I only had to pay 30%. Slowly but surely, things changed. The big corporations that extracted our oil, mined our coal, fracked our gas, and processed all of them were no more. When what remained was too expensive to extract, they left. The same story has played out all across the Commonwealth. Our legislators decided to favor big box stores over local merchants. They gave them tax breaks and built them infrastructure that they needed to locate outside of our towns. Now our towns are boarded up shadows of what they used to be. Where I used to walk to Thompson's Market for groceries, I now drive to Giant Eagle a half an hour away. Where Denny once suggested a sheetrock dimpler and coarse-threaded screws, today the underpaid workers at Home Depot direct me to aisle 7. Our legislators decided to change the labor laws to weaken our unions. Trade agreements were passed that globalized our economy. States competed with other states to lure businesses away. Accept lower pay or we're going to move, our employers told us. The new labor laws left our unions too weak to put up much of a fight, as we were pitted against the workers in Arizona, who were pitted against the workers in Mexico, who were pitted against the workers of China, a race to the bottom that has left middle-class wages flat for decades while corporate profits and inequality have exploded. A single income is no longer enough to get by on. So, parents must work outside the home, shouldering the dual burden of child care costs and lost time with our most precious resource, our sons and our daughters. People don't have time anymore to volunteer for fire halls, to serve in government, to work the polls, to engage in mutual friendliness. Our legislators slashed education budget, leaving some local schools with leaky roofs and inadequate supplies. They stopped covering the bulk of in-state tuition while also letting it skyrocket. The mere 30% that I had to pay to attend Slippery Rock has become the mere 30% that the state picks up. Paying that off with just a summer job sounds like a cruel joke to today's students. I could go on and on. In the almost 40 years that I've lived in this Pennsylvania town, I've watched it hemorrhage jobs and young people. It's time for that to end. Our communities are fractured. Many of us don't even know our own neighbors. And fewer of us make decisions based on neighborliness because we just don't have the time. Decisions made by our leaders have robbed us of community. Author and teacher Wallace Stegner broke we Americans down into two camps. There were the boomers and the stickers. The boomers, and here I'm not talking about the generation that I'm from, are those who pillage and run and want to make a killing and end up on Easy Street, while the stickers are motivated by an affection for place, with such a love for that place and its life that they want to preserve it and remain in it. When I reflect on my life and my life in Pennsylvania, this rings true. Our legislators have empowered the boomers and punished the stickers. Rather than rewarding those who cherish their neighbors and the place they live, they have incentivized extraction of wealth, leaving most Pennsylvanians struggling, and places like Cherry Valley neglected, impoverished, and shrinking. How do we get here? We have the best government that money can buy. In Pennsylvania, it is completely legal for paid lobbyists to gift, bribe, anything to our state representatives. These lobbyists routinely gift legislators with vacations, sports tickets, and of course, endless wining and dining every single night when the legislature is in session in Harrisburg. Is it any wonder our legislators are more responsive to lobbyists than they are to their constituents? In Pennsylvania, there are no limits on the amount of money that a person can or an entity can give to legislative campaigns. A single person can give tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to a single race. In Pennsylvania, legislators currently are reimbursed for their meals and housing while they're in Harrisburg. But they don't have to turn in receipts. It's called the per diem. Anyway, anywhere from $177 to $200 per day is what they get for that per diem. Many pocket their meal and housing stipend, but dine with lobbyists to avoid spending even 1 cent on food. Some politicians use their campaign accounts as personal slush funds, maintained by a steady flow of donations from shady lobbyists. And some legislators, like Senator Gene Yaw, have outside jobs. This, despite the fact that they are paid as full-time legislators with all those perks. And some of those legislators, like Senator Yaw, have jobs that look like gross conflicts of interest. Yaw works for the McCormick Law Firm, which does a fair amount of work with the oil and gas industry. Wow, get this, he chairs the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, which writes laws that directly impact the oil and gas industry. You can't make this stuff up. The lobbyists in Harrisburg, and there's one for every single legislator in the oil and gas industry, 203 oil and gas lobbyists registered. They don't feed and donate to our officials out of kindness. No, they expect something in return. In Pennsylvania, we have gerrymandering. Through clever partisan map making, politicians can predetermine election results. Instead of voters choosing their elected officials, our elected officials choose their voters. If elected, PK and I will focus our fight for the people like you. Our sole focus will be on bringing good-paying, family-sustaining jobs back to Pennsylvania. Instead of looking back to bring 20th century jobs here in the dying industries that left, we would push for 21st century jobs that wouldn't leave. The skilled craftspeople that used to work in those dying industries could be employed manufacturing and installing solar panels. Our underemployed building trades workers could be employed retrofitting our housing stock, making our houses less leaky and more self-sustaining. Pie in the sky? Hell no. It's a change of priority. Instead of enriching Wall Street, it's time to invest in Main Street. It's time to empower the stickers and boot the boomers. For too long, our leaders have promised us the world only to sell it to the highest corporate bidder. The corruption of our politicians has been the millstone around the neck of our once thriving working class communities. How much wealth must be extracted before we stand up and say, we're not going to take this? I think we're there. The jobs have gone. They're lost. They're not coming back. But the grit and the love of place are still here. We stickers are anxious to build back what is lost. We can create a new generation of high quality jobs by investing in a Green New Deal that restores the damage done by the extractive boomer industry and prepares our home for the future. It would also provide for an economy where our young people can stay and raise their families. I believe our Pennsylvania can be a place where every person can lead a dignified life, where every person who is able can work, where every person who where every person can comfortably afford the basic provisions they need to survive, and where we exist harmoniously with the land that we live and rely on and the neighbors that we have. Thanks.